Hi everyone. If you can hear me, please can you drop a comment or drop a reaction? Yeah, before we start the class, please if you can hear me, drop a reaction there. Okay, so I can see that there is no reaction there. Okay, yes, somebody has. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now and then we can proceed with the class. All right. So far I said we can, for those of you who are in the meeting, I told you you can actually um, download Python and also VS Code. So I'll assume that you've done that so we can take it from there. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, then we can now proceed. All right, so once again, I want to welcome everyone to this particular class. This class is going to be for Python basics. And in this class, we'll be learning how to use build a Python code. So you start from the basics, and then you learn to the part where you become very, very professional with the code. Now, before we start writing code, there are some few things I want us to take care of, and that is what is Python programming. So before you start writing code, you should understand what Python programming is. So Python programming or Python is a programming language which you can use for uh, building scripts. You can also use it to build websites and automate tasks. And one of the very useful uses of Python is actually in the area of data. So Python knows how to handle data properly, and because of that, the is used for AI generally. So in this class, we start from the basics. I will guide you from the beginner area where you become very, very proficient with using Python. Yeah. So let's go. Yeah. So one of the things we need to do create create a folder where we'll be writing our code. So I'm going to come here and then I'll open a folder here. Let me create a folder here. We are going to call this folder our project, and then I'll create this folder here. Now this is our folder and this is where we'll be writing our code. So I'll go ahead and open this folder here. So if you are very good with VS Code, you know we can actually right click here and click on open, which is the terminal. Then on your terminal, you're going to type code dot. What code does dot what code dot does is to open our VS Code in this particular folder. So if we have another folder that we want to open it from, let's assume we are in the desktop and then we want to open a folder, the project folder, we can now say code project, something like this. This will also help us open our code. It will also help us open our VS Code in that code folder. So I'm just going to do code dots here. Then our VS Code is going to automatically come up. All right. So I'll quickly give us a little tour around VS Code just to give us a little understanding of VS Code and how to make use of it. So this is VS Code, and these are the different feed of VS Code. Now over here we have the tab which is what carries some of our items, and we have this area also, which can also help us to open our terminals. So at this other side here, we have um, different add-ons that has been included on our code, which are very very useful for building or development. Now this is our project folder. Just like I said, we are currently in the project folder, and you can actually create a file here by right clicking on this area here and then clicking on file. Or on the other hand, you can also click here, this file here, and then you see new file here. So whichever one you are creating, you can use this, and this will automatically create your file for you. So I'm going to use new file here, and then I'm going to call this class one dot py. So what py mean is py is actually Python extension, and this is what would help us run our Python code. All right, so if you are looking at your VS Code and you notice that this particular run button is not available there, then you can actually come to the extension option here, and then you type in Python here. So if you have your VS Code installed, then you have your Python installed, and this button is not visible, you can actually use this. You can search for Python here and then install. So what you are installing here is the Python extension, which is this particular one here. So make sure you click on install, the one that has Microsoft.com. Make sure you click on install so I can help you install your Python. Now, once you have installed this, then you'll be able to see this run button. All right, guys. Yeah, so let's proceed with the class. Now, whenever you start writing your code or whenever you're writing a program, one of the important things for you to understand is actually how Python actually handle code, or how your computer rather handles data you are inserting. Because most of the time on your program, what you'll be inserting is actually data. So one of those things you need to do is to understand how you can actually put in data into your code or into your system, and then that data can actually be used to you can now start using that data to get what you actually want. Let's take for example, I want to actually do an addition on my computer. So I can store a particular file, a particular value, which is 2, and then I'll store another value, which is 3, and then I can now add both of them together, and then I'll get 5. Now, whenever you are putting in that value in your computer, there's actually a place where your computer would store them. Like, your computer is filled with memory starting from your hard drive, which is what store a larger portion of data, going to your RAM, which stores data in a bit or temporary data, then to your processor, which also store data but in chunks. So when you're actually writing your code, you have to make sure that you are considering those area also. Now, the area in your code or on your system or in your processor that would handle that small part of data you are inserting is what we called variable here. So let's assume that I want to do an addition. I can say I can say number one, or number one, let's say, should be equals to 3. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that this particular area here is going to be holding this data here for you on your system. So when you run this code, actually, it will actually it will actually store that data inside this place, and then it will be placed inside your memory. So I'm going to increase this a little, so in case for those who are not seeing it properly. So this will actually store your data. We store three inside a particular value on your system. So this part of the system that holds that your value, which is this your data, is referred to as variable. Yes, then the data you are inputting here is what we refer to as the value. Now on your system, you might likely not see this name this way. It's going to be in form of binary, that's 0 and 1. But I know you understand what I mean anyway. So in this case here, we have the first value. So I can actually have the second value, number 2, which I can refer to as 4 or so. Now, for me to actually run the data, now what I want you to understand is that your computer doesn't understand your normal text like, or your normal value like 3, 4, your normal number. What it understand is binary. So when you're actually inputting your code, you have to make sure that you follow you follow the actual way it stores data. For example, now this is actually a variable, and then this is another variable, and then this is another variable. So I can say result should be equals to the number 1 plus number 2. Now, what has happened here is that your data 2 plus 4 is now stored inside this place here. Now, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to tell you that in your computer, what you would be doing is to store value inside variable. So what we're doing so far, from now on, we're going to be storing values inside our variables. Now, there are different kind of values we can actually store. Um, we could store a string value. A string values are actually values that has text. Okay, so any value that has text in your Python code or that is quoted is what we refer to as a string value. So, for example, let me say a name. A name is an example. I'm going to write my own name, Emmanuel. So in this case here, this here is actually a string value, okay? And this is a variable. Then I can have another string value, which could be an email. I'm going to say Emmanuel, it's example.com. Now, in this case here, you will notice that we have heart, which is a symbol, and this is also regarded as a string value. Then another thing you should also notice here, you will notice that this value is actually quoted, is having a quote at the top there. Then your string value could also be a username. In this case, I'm going to say Emmanuel 123. So now when you have a value like this is also regarded as a string value. So here, this is how we store values. So if you want to store a string value like name, email, username, password, and other values, some other values, you can also store them in form of strings. Now, any value you are inputting and if the value is actually quoted, the value is regarded as a string value. Okay. So you could also have other value also um, apart from the ones I've mentioned here. You could also have other one. You could have an integer. So over here, this is referred to as a string value. So we could also have an integer. So I can say an integer value. I'm going to say $sign here. Integer value. So we could also have an integer value. Now, an integer values are actually values that are numeric without decimal. So a numeric value that is without decimal, we refer to them as an integer value. For example, if I say age here is equals to 21 years, this is actually an example of an integer values. Then another example of an integer value is actually population. So if I say population, and then I'm saying there are about 50 people here. Now, this is another example of an integer values because they are values without decimal. Now, why are these very important? Now, when you are actually grouping age, because you cannot say somebody is 1.5 years, or you can say that, but when you input 1.5 inside your value in Python here, which is more like 1.5, that could be approximated into 2, and that will be you adding 6 extra months to the person's age. So instead of expressing the person's age as 1.5 years, you can actually indicate that the person is actually 18 months, which would actually make a lot of sense. And then you are not approximating. Now, the same thing goes to population. When you're handling data that has to do with population, you don't want to say somebody we have about 50 and a half or 20 and a half persons in the group, because that's more like saying that one person is actually divided into two, and then we have half of it. I'm just trying to do that as a joke. So when you are dealing with population, it is always better you the data you work with at that case should be an integer. Then when you're also working with age, integer is actually a good example of data you can use. Now, another one you can also another kind of data we have is actually floats. So we have floats. So if I have floats here, and what float is actually numeric values with decimal. So in Python, any value that has decimal alongside with it is actually a float. For example, I can say somebody's height. I can say somebody's height is 6.5, which make a lot of sense. I can also say somebody's weight. Somebody's weight is 120.3, which also makes sense also. So when you're working with data that has to do with rate, weight, height, speed, these are all data you can actually group inside floats. They are very, very good when you use them on floats. And then when you have numbers that you know um, would go on division, when you have number you are going to be dividing, something like a rate, then the number should be stored inside floats. And also currency also. So if you have currency, you want to be handling data that has to do with currency, then floats should be a good data type that you should use for it. So I didn't indicate this. Let me indicate this so that we can differentiate. Please, if you have a question, please leave it on the comment section. I'll go through them and then we can take care of it. All right. So another data type we can also have is actually Boolean value. So we could also have a Boolean value. And what Boolean value does is to actually work with data that has to do with true or false. So I can say Boolean. So when you are working with data and you know that this data you would either get true or false, you can either get true or false, then these are good example of Boolean value. So in this case, I can say Here is student, and then I'm putting true, or I can say is active, and then I say false. Now, there is an important thing you should also note here is when you're actually typing in your Boolean value in Python, those values should your true or false value should always start with capital letter. Yes, so if you have that, please start out with capital letter. All right, so if you have a question, you can drop it on the comment section. I'll go through them, then we would proceed. All right, so far we have strings, we have integers, we have floats, and then we have Boolean value. Now, these are values these are variables we have here that can handle a single values. Yes, so we have variable here, and then they are handling a single value. Now, sometimes you can have variable that handles large number of values. In this case here, example of those variable that can handle large number of values is actually list. So I can have a list. I can have a list where I can say a list of fruits, and what I'm inputting would be fruits. So I'll enter apple, banana, and orange. Apple, banana, orange. So there's something I want you to note here while we are inputting our value. You notice that every value here is actually quoted. This is also quoted, and this is also quoted. This is saying that we have inside this fruit, we have list of strings value. So these are string value, these other string value, and these other string value. Then you also see that those values are actually separated with comma. So they are actually separated with comma. So I have the first value here, then I have comma, then the second value, I have comma, then the third value. So when you are preparing your list, this is how you follow to put in your list of items. Then another thing you should also take note of, I have here the brackets here. So you see I have the brackets here, not parentheses. This is just a bracket that is holding all my values together. So in this case, I now have a single variable that holds multiple strings value. I can also have a single variable that can also hold multiple of integer value. For example, I can have age or ages, which can be 21. I can have 24. I can have 33. I can have 31. Now, in this case, this is also a list of integer value. Then you can also have um, list of Boolean value. For example, we could have weight. So 120.3. Then I can have 90. I can have 63.5. Now, these are just lists of integer value, or sorry, list of floats rather. Now, you could also have everything placed in one place. So we can say we have students. So And then in the student, we have the name of the student, which could be Emmanuel. Then we could have his age, which could be 24. Then we can have his weight, which is 120.0 or point 0.2, whichever. So in this case here, we can now have a list of values with multiple of items. So you can use this as part of your work. Let me bring this back here. Yes. So these are just list of an items. You could also have um, other kind of items. So we are going to take some minutes break. I'll go through questions. If there's any questions, then we can continue from there. Please drop your comments, drop your question in the comment section if you have any. I'll go through them, then we can take care of that. Okay, any question so far? If you have a question, please, you can indicate now. Just type it on the comment section if you have a question. No question? No question? Okay, yeah, I think everybody understand it now. All right, so let's continue with this here. Now, so far, what we've had here is actually list of items. This is actually list of items. So we could also have other items also. Example of those items that we could also have that handle multiple value is actually a dictionary. So I'm going to use the dollar sign here, dictionary. So we could also have dictionary of items. And the way the dictionary works, dictionary actually taking pairs of items. They go with pairs of items. For example, I might want to undo somebody's name alongside um, with his actual name. So I can indicate that inside a single quote, and then that would actually pass my information out. For example, I could also decide that I want to actually undo record uh, of a student or a person. Now, to do that, I'm going to have the person's name alongside with the person's actual name. Then I'm going to have the person's age alongside with the person's age, and then other information. Let's just look at example. Supposing I have students here, and then I want to store this. I can store this in name. Then the student's name is actually Emmanuel. Then I can also have the student's class. The student class could be grade one. This is grade one. And then I can have other information of the students. Now, one thing you should observe about dictionary is that it makes use of curly brackets to actually hold values together, unlike lists that make use of bracket, just bracket to hold um, different multiple values together. Your dictionary make use of curly braces or curly bracket to hold values together. And then when you look at the values inside here, you will see we have this here, which is name, and it is assigned Emmanuel here. So looking at what we have inside this place, that is the same thing as name equals to Emmanuel, and then class equals to grade. Sorry, I'm going to use class 1 because this is actually. So I'm going to say class equals to, or class 1 equals to grade 1. Yeah, so this we have here is the same thing as what we have here. The only difference is that this is stored inside a single variable. I hope you understand that. Yeah. So To properly store your value, if you are storing multiple values, these are the options you can make use of to store multiple values. And this is called dictionary. So in the dictionary, this particular value here is now referred to as um, your key. This is referred to as your key or a key in the dictionary or dictionary key. And then this is referred to as the value itself. So in your list also have key. For example, this is apple, this is banana, and this is orange. The difference between this list and the dictionary is that the key is actually not visible. But for this particular one, the key is actually zero, or you can also refer to it as index zero. So if I'm looking for the zero index or the first item, this apple is what I'll get. If I'm looking for index one item, banana is what I'll get. If I'm looking for index 2, then orange is what I get. So this is index 2. The index is more like the key in this case. So if I'm looking for the name is Emmanuel. If I'm looking for the class is grade 1. So this is referred to as dictionary, and that is how dictionary handles your data. Now you see here that dictionary is actually handling lists, is actually handling strings of data. They could also handle they could also handle integers. They could also handle floats. They could also handle the combination of different data type. For example, I can say student record. So for my student record, then I can now have name to be equals to Emmanuel. Then I can have age to be equals to 24. Then I can have amount to be a float. So if I have this, you will see that I can actually still I can store numbers inside my dictionary. Then I can also have is active. Sorry, is active can be equals to true. Now in this case, you see now that I now have um, our strings, which is the first one here. Then I have an integer. Then I have a float. Then um, I have a boolean value. Now I also want to also explain that you could also have your dictionary to have list of items together. We're going to go in depth later on in the class when it comes to data manipulation. But let us just see example of what I'm trying to say. So I can have school record, I can say the name, and then the name of the school can be Chilton. Example. Then I can have the classes. And then in these classes, I can now insert my list there. So I can have grade 1 or primary 1. I can have grade 2. I can have grade 3. And then I can have other classes also. So in this case here, you see that this still remain the key of this dictionary. Then this is the value. Now our value is now a list that we have up here. So these are another way you can actually handle your data. We're going to go in depth on this when we start working with when we start talking about data manipulation. All right, so another kind of data type we have is the tuple. So we have the tuple, and the way tuple works, tuple are actually values that are immutables. So if we have list of items that we might not change in the future, we can store them inside tuple. For example, let's assume we are building a game application. And then on that game application, we want the resolution size, the screen resolution size or the screen size to remain the same. So even though the game might change, the character in the game might change, we actually want the screen size to be the same thing. We can store it inside a tuple. Or for example, we want the color or the background color or the theme color to remain the same throughout the game. We can also store that particular value in the tuple. Now let's see what the tuple looks like. I'm going to call this IP address, and then to now see our tuple actually makes use of parentheses. So I'm going to call this 123 dot or 127. Let's make it three dot 0 dot 0 dot 1. This is my local IP address here. And then I can also have the port number port 56. Port 56. Now in this case here, this particular data I've established here cannot be altered. Your dictionary data can be altered, the list data can be altered, but in this case, once this is established, it cannot be altered unless you come in here and change them. Okay, so you could use it in different areas, but this is an example of how you can use your tuple. Now, another data type you can also use in Python is actually dictionary. Now, dictionary is actually a collection of group of unique items. So if I have some number of items, then I want them to be unique, meaning that I don't want two items to appear inside my container or my variable. I can use the uh, dictionary. So I can use the what did I mention it before? Yeah, I can use my set rather. So I'm going to call this set. I'm going to call this set. Yeah. So let's see what the set looks like. So for sets, I can let's assume we are considering Premier League or Champions League. You will know our Champions League actually um, you would only have one. You only have one one team in the league. You can't have two teams in the league. For example, Arsenal cannot appear twice in the Champions League. In a Champions League in a season of the Champions League, so you will only see them once. So to do that, I'm going to use this, and I'll be putting in Madrid, and I'll be using Inter Milan, and I'll be using Arsenal, and using Chelsea, and then I can also have Man City, and I can have Man United, then I can also have Liverpool. Now, if you look at this data here for my set, you will see that I have this called the curly braces. So this is the curly braces. The same thing with what we have in the dictionary. And the difference is that this key does not appear alongside with the item. Then that's one. Then two, we cannot have two the same items together. So if I have Arsenal 2 or Chelsea 2 in this particular container, when I call this container, it will only show me one. For example, let me try to display this group of um, club. So I'm going to say print Champions League, and then I'll execute this. Now you see at this point here, I have Chelsea, Liverpool, Man United, Man City, Inter Milan, Arsenal, and Madrid. Now, supposing I come in here and then I put in another Chelsea here. Now I now have Chelsea two places. I have Chelsea here, then I have Chelsea here also. But if I run this here, you'll notice Chelsea only appear once here. Now it appear once because I store those data inside the dictionary, so they cannot appear twice. The values inside this particular container or variable are actually unique value. So yes, so far we've talked a lot about this. This is just the beginning of our class. As time goes on, we're going to go in depth and um, visit different areas of Python. So this class, I intended it to be a very brief class because I want us to take this in, assimilate this after the class. So after this class, please take your time, watch this video again, and this would actually be um, where we will start from in our next class. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this section of this class. And my name is Emmanuel Hope. And for those of you that don't know, I am a cybersecurity engineer and also a backend developer. It's good to have you here in the team, and I want to welcome you once more in our YouTube channel. So if you are seeing this video, please subscribe, and you can also share with your friends so they can subscribe to our channel. Then that would help us produce more videos and reach out to more people. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, bye. All right, bye, guys. Good having you.